You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. Same-sex marriages will be legal in some British churches by 2014. The Equalities Minister has vowed to fast-track legislation plans in the new year allowing gay marriages. The Culture Secretary, Maria Miller, made the announcement in the House of Commons.
In the 20th century, when the law was changed to recognise married men and married women as equal before the law, was that accepted without fierce protest? No. In each century, Parliament has acted, sometimes radically, to ensure marriage reflects our society, to keep it relevant and meaningful. Marriage isn't static, it's evolved, and Parliament has chosen to act over the centuries to make marriage more equal and fair. We now face another such moment, another such chance in this new century. For me, extending marriage to same-sex couples will strengthen, not weaken, this vital institution.
However, the Church of England will be guaranteed a blanket exemption from holding same-sex marriages. Maria Miller also promised a quadruple lock protecting the Church of England from being taken to the Court of Human Rights to be sued if a gay couple is refused a marriage ceremony. Legislation will be published next month and it could take up to 12 months to get through. And there's warnings of a split in the Conservative Party. Maria Miller may have a fight on her hands. Joining me in the studio to discuss the new legislation in Britain allowing same-sex marriages and the ban on the Church of England from conducting them is Terence Weldon, author and blogger of Queering the Church, Andrew Marsh, campaigns director for Christian Concern, Joe Musgrave, political director from Out for Marriage, and Dr. Sharon James from the Coalition for Marriage campaign group. Now, Quakers in Britain have welcomed the government's move to allow the celebration of same-sex marriages in places of worship in England and Wales, saying the day the first same-sex couple can marry in their Quaker meeting will be a wonderful day for marriage and a great day for religious freedom in Britain. Meanwhile, the Bishop of Leicester, Tim Stevens, said marriage is neither the property of the government nor the property of the church. While marriage has evolved, the fundamental feature has remained the same, that marriage is a union of one man and one woman. The Catholic Church will be allowed to refuse to hold ceremonies for same-sex couples. So first of all, I'd like a response from each of you on Maria Miller's announcement on legally allowing same-sex marriage. Terence Weldon.
I am a practicing Catholic. I'm completely active in my local parish. I'm also a father and a grandfather, and I am openly gay. And trying to reconcile those two has led me to explore an awful lot of issues. And as a result of my own explorations, I now write extensively about what I think of as the intersection of faith and sexuality, specifically with reference to gay, lesbian Christians, but also with some other contexts.
So in response to the announcement made by Maria Miller, this is obviously a welcomed piece of legislation, but sits difficultly within the church.
Yeah, I think it is to be welcomed. I think it's important to recognise that not all churches want to conduct same-sex weddings and respect that. But I think that those who do, like the Quakers, should have that opportunity. I would take strong exception to the statement of the Bishop of Leicester, who says that marriage has always been between one man and one woman. That is simply not so. In biblical times, and we should take the Bible seriously, marriage was very often between one man, several wives, a number of concubines and slaves.
For further response to the announcement made by Maria Miller, I'll come to you, Andrew Marsh.
I think we're staggered and very disappointed, as I think many backbench MPs are, and many people across the country, not only because of the content of this announcement, but because of the process that the government has gone through. For example, this issue of allowing same-sex, or plans to allow same-sex marriage in churches and other religious premises, that was explicitly ruled out in the consultation, and now a few months later that promise has been broken. But not only because of the fact of the broken promise there, but because it seems that the government may well be using this as a way of sidetracking the debate, distracting attention from the real issue, which is that of how marriage is going to be defined for the whole of society, perhaps because the government has been taken by surprise at the extent of the opposition and concern over these moves amongst the public at large, amongst many groups, including churches, and amongst its own backbench MPs.
Andrew Marsh, Christian Concern there. And come to you, Joe Musgrave, the political director for Out for Marriage, who I saw has had many pledges of support from London Mayor Boris Johnson.
That's right. Yeah, well, I mean, I broadly agree with what Terence had to say. I think his is a balanced view, one that apparently Andrew doesn't share, which is that this is a balance between different types of faith groups' freedoms. Those who have a theological understanding of marriage that accommodates same-sex couples, they want to be able to practice that religious freedom. Those that don't have such an understanding, and perhaps a more stringent one man, one woman, they should also be protected in that definition, not have to practice something that goes against their faith. And it's also worth bearing in mind quite a number of misnomers Andrew's tried to spread here. Anthony Wells, who's the respected pollster, runs UK Polling Report, he said the broad tenor of all the opinion polls show that the public support this move. It's not any good taking one particular poll. You've got to look at the run of them. So it's not true to say that there's widespread opposition to this. So in balance, I think Maria Miller struck a good note. We need to see how, when this bill actually gets formed, how much of these protections come through. And I think along with actually some church groups, I will be analysing that to make sure the protections are in place to protect both those sides that I've just talked about.
Maria Miller said that marriage needed to be made relevant within society. Dr. Sharon James from the Coalition for Marriage campaign group, what's your response to the announcement in the House of Commons?
Well, Juliet, you said that Maria Miller was fast-tracking the legislation. The Coalition for Marriage would say that she's bulldozing through legislation that was not announced in any of the manifestos of the three main political parties. There was never any great demand for this among the British public. What MPs are saying is they never had a single email or letter in their postbags asking for same-sex marriage. But when Mr Cameron announced this, somehow because of either some personal view of his own or because of a desperate desire to decontaminate the Conservative Party of a seeming image of being old-fashioned, letters began to flood into MPs' postbags. And we heard in Parliament yesterday MPs saying that they were almost besieged with constituents saying they didn't want this to happen. The Coalition for Marriage is a grassroots movement of people of all different faiths or no faith at all. We have both gay people and straight people who want to maintain the definition of marriage as a lifelong exclusive union of one man and one woman. We've raised the biggest petition in recent history. Over 620,000 people have signed our petition to keep the current definition of marriage. The online petition on the Coalition for Marriage website is still open for people who would like to add their voice. And the government has shamefully gone back on promise after promise after promise. As Andrew already mentioned, the consultation was a completely flawed exercise. They said that they were going to consult, but said they were going to do this anyway, whatever the result. They said in the consultation this would only be about civic ceremonies.
Sorry, Sharon. Sorry, Sharon. That's not what they said. They said that this was about how to implement the policy that was actually in one of the Conservative election mini manifestos. So it's not true to say this was never presented. Sorry, Sharon.
Very few people ever saw it. It was not put before the British electorate as a whole, which is what a manifesto is supposed democratically to do.
Now, respond, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it's staggering that this still continues, this idea. But what the consultation was trying to do, and this is why the petition itself wasn't included in the overall package, what the Coalition for Marriage petition did is it made one simple statement, which is that they believed between a man and one woman. What the consultation did is it put out around 20 questions, detailed policy questions. How could this be worked through? How could protections be done here? What's your opinion of this over that, say, civil partnerships for straight people or whatever? So whilst due recognition was given to this petition, and it should be, if it doesn't address what's in the consultation, i.e. detailed policy questions, how can you fold that in? Because it's not going to the parameters of what was set out in the first place.
Joe, I come back and say that the
Very
head
quickly,
of
Sharon.
Unity in Government said that each voice on the petition would be counted as an individual response, which is why people focused on the petition. And they've gone back on their word. And the government has only taken in online representations from its website. They made no effort to guard that against multiple submissions or foreign submissions. So Ben & Jerry's in America was stirring up people to put in submissions. So the government has been listening to people outside the country and ignoring British people within the country.
Has the government been ignoring British people then? What's your response to that, Andrew?
Well, I just wondered if I'd come back on a point Joe made, because he's outlined there that the government was consulting on what was in the consultation document. And is it his understanding that the government clearly and explicitly ruled out the possibility of same-sex marriages being conducted in churches? And if so, why has this now appeared in response to the consultation?
Well, I think the answer to that is it's said in the consultation there are no plans to go ahead. But clearly, and if you read the consultation response document, rather than just the headlines, if you actually read the 20-page document that outlines the responses that the Government Equalities Office received, you'll see that people time and again said that actually a blanket ban on churches, on faith groups, isn't tenable, because the religious freedoms of people like Terry, of Quakers, of Unitarians, of liberal Jews, they'll be infringed, so they'll take the government to court. So a better system was the twin-track system that's been laid out.
And is this twin-track system a good system, Terry?
I think so, absolutely. And I'll just stick to this first, but I want to come back earlier to something that Sharon said. Freedom of religion is an absolutely crucial value in our society. And if we're going to really respect freedom of religion, we must provide for freedom of those religions which see equal marriage as a religious duty and obligation. And there is, in fact, a very strong religious and biblical case that one can make for gay marriage. But I want to...
No, I'm sorry, sorry, Sharon. Sorry, I'm going to let Terry speak because you've had a bit of time earlier. Terry.
And I want to come back, Sharon, to something that you said earlier. You referred to the, I think, the statement in the petition, and certainly the statement in some of the research that was conducted by the Campaign for Marriage, which said that most people believe that marriage should be a lifelong and exclusive commitment between a man and a woman. I accept that is the statement in the petition. I accept that was the finding of that piece of research. However, as Joe pointed out, that research was flawed for a number of reasons. In particular, the finding is irrelevant because that finding was about what people believe marriage should be, not how the law should define marriage. If you think that means the law should prohibit same-sex marriage, do you also believe that the law should once again prohibit divorce? Do you think that adultery, which is not an exclusive commitment or a violation of an exclusive commitment, should we go back to making adultery a criminal offence, perhaps by stoning adulterers as was specified in the Bible? I think the whole point is that what people believe marriage should be and what the law should do are two totally separate things. I also want to agree with Joe. My professional background before getting involved in my writing was, in fact, as a professional market researcher. I am very familiar with all the polling that has been done. I have seen the UK polling report analysis that Joe referred to. He is absolutely correct. All the credible and relevant research that has been done shows very, very clearly that a very comfortable majority of British voters support gay marriage, and that in fact includes a majority of Catholic voters, which is my personal concern.
Which suggests that marriage is being brought in line with how it's reflected within society. Sharon, if you've got an immediate response to Terry, speak up. If not, I'll go to Andrew for his.
I've got an immediate response to Terry in the religious freedom argument. How far do you take that? I have a copy of a Quaker gay and lesbian newsletter in front of me that's calling for the recognition of plural relationships. There's a Unitarian website that calls for the recognition of plural relationships. Are we saying that just because a religion wants something, they should have the freedom to do it? And then in terms of adultery and divorce, it is the role of the state to try to maintain a strong marriage culture. We've already radically weakened that through over-easy divorce laws, and I don't think I would want to excuse that, and I hope that nobody on the panel would. But the fact that there are wrongs already done does not mean to say that we should further weaken the marriage culture. And on the polls, I go back to the fact that Comres, which is an independent polling company, says that it finds that the majority of the British public supports maintaining rights for gay and lesbian couples through civil partnerships, and when they understand that those rights are in place, they then say that they wish to maintain marriage as the union of a man and a woman.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. Joining me in the studio to discuss new legislation allowing gay marriages is Terence Weldon, author and blogger of Queering the Church, Andrew Marsh, campaigns director for Christian Concern, Joseph Musgrave, political director from Out for Marriage, Dr. Sharon James from the Coalition for Marriage campaign group. Picking up from your comment on the weakening of marriage culture, What's your response to that, Joe? I mean, who should define the weakness or strength of a marriage?
Okay, first thing, and this is a point that needs to be made time and again. You can't take one single poll, no matter how credible or incredible it may be. It's one poll. It's a snapshot, a moment in time. You've got to look. I accept that poll. But if you look at the majority of polling, all polling over the last year, the broad tenor of that polling says people support. So you can't just pick one poll. You've got to look at them all, because that gives you an opinion over time. Now, as to marriage culture, this the way I view marriage and the way that I understand what it should be doing is it binds people by mutual ties of commitment. It's the paradigm in which society, particularly, all over the world, we've viewed it as the way to bind two adults who love one another, who want to raise children together. Now, I don't think any of that excludes gay people. In fact, I think gay people can enrich and strengthen the institution. Now, where Sharon disagrees with me is over that definition. But where I get off the bus that Sharon's talking about is actually what you've got to do is you've got to balance the freedoms. It's not... basically what Sharon and to an extent Andrew are saying is they don't agree that gay people should have access to marriage. Therefore, I'm going to take the decision for all of society and say none of you can do it. And I think that's going a step too far for them to dictate how everyone else should practice their beliefs. And
that obviously it contradicts what Maria Miller announced yesterday and her plans to balance equality and faith. And I think this legislation does do that. I'll come to you next, Andrew, then you, Terry.
Well, I'm grateful for Joe and to an extent Terry to bringing the discussion back actually to the essential issue, which is what is marriage and how will it be defined for the whole of society. As I've said already, I think that there is a diversionary tactic in the government introducing at this late stage the issue of same-sex marriage in churches. And though there are important issues around that, the key issue is what is marriage. And I think this debate has been fueled by an agenda that is, when we stop and think about it, is driven by a destruction of gender, by an attempt to try and say that gender, male and female, is irrelevant and incidental, it's accidental, and it's not central. And that marriage reflects the fact not just that marriage is a public commitment and not just it's an institution in that sense recognised in society, not just commitment and love, but complementarity, and saying for all of society that male and female is important, so that we saying someone's masculinity and someone's femininity are important. And the very seen in all sorts of ways, but the very obvious point that male bodies are made for female bodies, rather in a way that a male body is not made for a male body and a female body for a female body. Just one indication.
Well, I think, Terry, you should respond to this.
Well, I would like to respond to Andrew, but before I do that, I want to come back to one thing that Sharon raised earlier in response to me. She said, where do we stop? Some groups are wanting to use the same principle of religious freedom to support and endorse plural marriages. Now, I personally have no strong feelings on plural marriages. It certainly is not my personal choice. However, what I really cannot understand is the argument from religious groups against plural relationships. If your starting point is a biblical one, after all, throughout the Old Testament, polygamous marriages were the norm. In terms of faith and religion, we must also remember that Christianity is not the only faith that we need to allow for in this country. There's a growing Muslim population, for example. The Muslim religion endorses and supports plural marriages. So if your starting point is one of faith, I think that freedom of religion, certainly you should allow for plural relationships. Coming back to Andrew, and in terms of what is the nature of marriage, I would like to point out that there is no single, simple definition of marriage that applies across all societies and across all periods of history. Same-sex marriage has certainly been rare, but it is not true that it is a new invention. It was known in a number of historic societies, in Crete, for example, in classical China, in the Mayan civilization, and surprisingly enough, right across Africa in pre-colonial times. I would also point out that even within the Christian tradition, what is the biblical understanding of marriage? My starting point is the earliest version of Genesis, right in the beginning of Genesis 2. The Lord said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a companion. Not a wife, not a woman, a companion. Gender neutral. Secondly, in terms of the New Testament, St. Paul very clearly stated, in Christ there is neither male nor female. What was Paul's understanding of marriage? It was not to create children. Paul's understanding of marriage was, first of all, he preferred celibacy, and then stated very clearly that not everybody can be celibate, and for those who are not celibate, who can't do it, it is better for them to marry. He didn't say only for men to marry women, better for them to marry.
Okay, so we'll come back to Andrew then on the question of who really owns marriage. And isn't it fair to say that marriage is more than procreation? It's more than just the religious aspect. It's a spiritual commitment. It's a public commitment to your friends and family. It doesn't matter whether you're a male and female. It could be female, male and male. It's that other commitment. I mean, if it wasn't so relevant, then why would people who have had existing civil partnerships wish to change them now to a marriage?
It's all of those things and more, but the complementarity aspect is an essential element, not an incidental or accidental. And I just need to come back on the points that Terry's made, because we need to be absolutely clear. People are entitled, of course, and all the people in this debate across the country, to their personal opinion. But no one should claim the authority of Jesus Christ for same-sex marriages, because he's the most compassionate person who's ever walked on earth, and yet when he was pushed on this point, he went out of his way to uphold the fact that marriage is between one man and one woman. He did it, for example, in Matthew chapter 19 when he was questioned, and he actually went back to the beginning and cited the creation principle. So have you not read that in the beginning the Creator made them male and female? For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So let me just state the point that I'm making very clearly here. I'm not particularly saying that those who aren't Christians, what their view on these words would be at this point. But I am saying that those who claim the name of Jesus Christ and his authority cannot cite him. The Bible is clear from start to finish, and those verses, those words come just a few lines after the ones that Terry's quoted. The companion is a female for the male.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. I'm joined by Andrew Marsh, Campaign Director for Christian Concern, Joe Musgrave, Political Director from Out for Marriage, Dr. Sharon James from the Coalition for Marriage Campaign Group, and Terence Weldon, author and blogger on Queering the Church.
See, on Monday, Maria kind of went into why she thinks this is important, so I don't think she went too far the other way. Now, we've sucked up quite a lot of oxygen, so I'm going to err on the side of pith, which is, this is essentially about what do you do when a number of people disagree? How do you facilitate the fact that they disagree? Do you impose one view over another? And I don't think that that's the right way forward in our society, which is why I welcome what Maria Miller's done, because she's trying to get a balance between people that disagree, and ultimately that's what democracy is there to facilitate. And, you know, it's going to disappoint some people, but compromise always does.
A disappointment or compromise, but then does this not put Britain as a country that other developed countries could follow? We should be therefore proud to live in a one of the most advanced democracies in the world. Despite the disagreements, there will be compromise met.
I think that it's important to state that what the church is seeking to do here is not to fight its own corner and protect its own place in society. It's actually seeking to contribute to the wider debate in society about what marriage is and the place that it holds, and whether there is something distinct about marriage for the benefit of adults, for the benefit of children and society as a whole. On the issue of these so-called protections, I'm grateful to Peter Tatchell, prominent homosexual rights campaigner, for his openness and honesty on this. Since the announcement yesterday, he's come out and said this faith-based discrimination could be open to legal challenge. The government is treating two churches differently from all other religions. Discriminating between faith groups is probably legal under the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights. So I think he can see that there are issues already with what has been announced.
Come in on that one, Julia.
Yes,
because I think there
Dr.
was
Sharon
a
James.
disproportionate emphasis on the church non-religion in that front bit of her statement. because what she was completely ignoring was any protection for ordinary people in Britain, ordinary workers who will find themselves on the wrong side of the law if same-sex marriage is pushed through.
Could you explain how an ordinary person could find themselves on the wrong side of the law if same-sex marriage was pushed through?
In 2011, a housing officer in Manchester called Adrian Smith was demoted from his job and given a 40% pay cut.
Which was subsequently reversed because they realised they'd made the wrong decision and he challenged it.
Back his lost earnings. So what we're saying is that already...
So you just ignore that, basically, is what you do, right?
Already in Britain, before this goes through, people can find themselves discriminated against and not tolerated because they don't believe in same-sex unions being the same as traditional unions. So yes, we must have a tolerant society, but the old kind of intolerance, which was very unacceptable because it discriminated against gay and lesbian people, is now being replaced by a new kind of intolerance, whereby people who believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman find themselves discriminated against, treated as bigoted, and if this law goes through, they will find themselves on the wrong side of the law. We believe that teachers could be sacked for not promoting this in classrooms, despite Maria Miller's statement in her response to the contrary. Expert legal opinion says that will be the case. And so the Coalition for Marriage is saying that ordinary people who are uncomfortable and unhappy with this should be still raising their voices, signing the petition, finding out the facts, representing their case to MPs before it's too late.
Terence Weldon, writer and blogger of Queering the Church. I'd like your final comment.
I just want to respond to this hoary Old Testament about Christians being discriminated against for their beliefs. That is simply not true. If as a Christian you do not support gay marriage, nobody and no law is going to force you to marry the same sex. The discrimination is not for one's belief, it is when you try to impose your belief on others. In other words, the law does not discriminate against you, the law acts against your own discrimination against others. And that's all I have to say on that. Thank you.
Andrew Marsh, Campaigns Director for Christian Concern.
I think the big question that the country has to face up to is what will be the nature of marriage. I think this move to redefine marriage for everyone is driven by a misjudged and disingenuous notion of equality. Equality was presented to us as about protecting difference and recognising that people are different and there's diversity. It's being used more widely in court cases to punish difference, and this is driven by a suggestion that equality means uniformity. We've all got to pretend to be the same. Let's, in marriage, recognise that heterosexual relationships do have a distinct quality from others.
OK, and finally from you then, Joe Musgrave, Political Director from Out for Marriage.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think, again, this is about balancing two sets of people that disagree, and I think we've struck the right note. But I want to end by slightly agreeing with Andrew and Sharon. I will be the first one on their side if this ends up to a new kind of religious intolerance. And if people are attacked because they don't want to go and do this, I'll be the first one campaigning on your side. I don't want it to go the other way. So don't needlessly polarize it. We can work together on many issues. So that's basically the end of my spiel.
A good place to end our discussion. I'd like to thank all my guests. Andrew Marsh, Campaigns Director for Christian Concern, Joe Musgrave, Political Director, Out for Marriage, Dr. Sharon James from the Coalition for Marriage Campaign Group, and Terence Weldon, author and blogger on Queering the Church.